The apartment was silent, except for the rhythmic dripping of the kitchen faucet. Sarah Chen pressed her back against the bathroom door, her trembling hands clutching the pregnancy test she'd just taken. 3 years had passed since the FBI raid on the Eternal Dawn compound. 3 years since she'd watched her fellow believers drink the poisoned communion wine while she hid in the supply closet, too terrified to join them in their ascension. But as she stared at the positive result, something impossible began to echo through her one-bedroom apartment. Low, haunting voices rose from beneath the floorboards, their words familiar yet forgotten. The same chant that had filled the compound's prayer hall every morning at dawn, the same melody that had lulled her to sleep as a child. Sarah's reflection in the bathroom mirror flickered, and for a moment she saw not her own face, but the hollow eyes of someone she'd tried desperately to forget. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, as if the dead were calling her home. The doctor's office felt sterile and cold as Sarah sat across from Dr. Martinez, her therapist of 2 years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the diplomas lining the walls. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of her sweater, a nervous habit she'd developed since leaving the compound. She'd been making progress, or so everyone told her. The nightmares had lessened, the panic attacks were manageable, and she'd even started dating again. "The chanting returned last night," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "But this time, it wasn't just in my dreams. I heard it when I was fully awake making dinner. The voices were so clear, so real." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her pen poised over the notepad. She'd heard about Sarah's auditory hallucinations before, but something in her patient's demeanor suggested this was different, more urgent. Sarah's eyes darted toward the window, as if expecting to see familiar faces peering through the glass, beckoning her to return. The pregnancy test sat on Sarah's kitchen counter like an accusation. She hadn't told Dr. Martinez about it yet, couldn't bring herself to voice the impossible truth. The Eternal Dawn had taken everything from her, her childhood, her family, her sense of reality, but they'd also taken something else, something that doctors had confirmed years ago after her escape. The compound's purification rituals had left her unable to conceive, the result of untreated infections and malnutrition. But here she was, carrying a child that shouldn't exist. The chanting had started the moment she'd seen those 2 pink lines, as if the dead were celebrating her impossible condition. Sarah picked up the test again, studying it under the harsh kitchen light. The voices grew stronger, more distinct. She could almost make out individual words now, fragments of the sacred text that had governed her life for 15 years. "The chosen vessel," they seemed to whisper, "the final offering." Marcus, her boyfriend of 6 months, found her sitting on the couch at 3 in the morning, staring at the blank television screen. His dark hair was disheveled from sleep, concern etched across his features as he noticed her rigid posture. He'd known about her past from the beginning, the cult, the survivor's guilt, the therapy sessions, but he'd never seen her like this, so distant, so haunted. "Sarah, you're scaring me." His voice was gentle, careful not to startle her. She turned toward him slowly, her eyes unfocused and glassy. "Do you hear them? The voices. They're getting louder." Marcus sat beside her, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "There's no one here but us," he said softly. "Maybe we should call Dr. Martinez." But Sarah was already standing, walking toward the bedroom with measured steps, as if following an invisible guide. "They're waiting for me," she murmured. "They've been waiting all this time." The next morning brought a discovery that shattered what remained of Sarah's fragile peace. Hidden beneath loose floorboards in her bedroom, boards she'd never noticed before, lay a collection of items that shouldn't exist. Photographs of the compound's inner circle, including several of herself as a child, standing beside the charismatic leader known as Father Gabriel. But these weren't ordinary photographs. They were pristine, untouched by time, as if they'd been placed there yesterday. Beneath the photos lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her own handwriting, entries dated just days ago, describing conversations with the dead, plans for a blessed reunion, and detailed drawings of the compound's layout. Sarah's hands shook as she read passages she had no memory of writing. The final entry, dated that very morning, contained a single line repeated hundreds of times. "The child will complete the circle." The chanting swelled around her, no longer distant, but surrounding her completely, as if the entire apartment had become a prayer chamber. Dr. Martinez's emergency session felt different this time. The usually composed therapist seemed rattled as Sarah described the hidden journal and the impossible pregnancy. "Dissociative episodes can create false memories," she explained, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "The mind sometimes creates elaborate scenarios to process trauma." But Sarah could see the doubt in her eyes, especially when she mentioned the pregnancy that medical science said was impossible. "What if I never really left?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if this apartment, this life, Marcus, what if it's all just another one of Father Gabriel's mind games?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Dr. Martinez had treated other cult survivors, but none had experienced anything quite like this. The chanting that seemed to follow Sarah everywhere, the physical impossibilities, the way she sometimes spoke in the compound's unique dialect without realizing it. "We need to run some tests," the doctor said finally, though they both knew tests couldn't explain the supernatural. The research Sarah conducted that night revealed a truth more disturbing than any hallucination. The Eternal Dawn compound hadn't been destroyed in the raid, as she'd been told. According to recent news reports she found buried in obscure local websites, the site had been converted into a psychiatric facility, the same facility where she'd supposedly recovered for 6 months after her rescue, the place where she'd met Dr. Martinez, the place where she'd learned to remember her escape. The photographs in the journal showed her not as a child, but as an adult, standing in ceremonial robes beside Father Gabriel just weeks ago. In the background, she could make out the faces of other survivors she'd met in group therapy, all of them older, all of them wearing the same white robes, all of them smiling with the serene expression of true believers. The chanting grew to a crescendo as she stared at the final photograph, herself, visibly pregnant, kneeling before an altar in a room she recognized as her own apartment. Marcus wasn't in bed when Sarah woke the next morning. She found him in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with mechanical precision, humming a tune that sent ice through her veins. It was the Eternal Dawn's morning prayer, the same melody that awakened her every day for 15 years. When he turned to face her, his eyes held the same vacant serenity she remembered from her fellow believers. "Good morning, Sister Sarah," he said, his voice carrying an inflection she'd never heard before. "Father Gabriel sends his blessings." The pregnancy test was gone from the counter, replaced by a small vial of clear liquid that caught the morning light. "It's time for your medicine," Marcus continued, offering her the vial with steady hands. "The child is ready to ascend." Sarah backed toward the door, but it wouldn't open. The apartment had become a prison, and she realized with growing horror that she'd never actually left the compound at all. The walls of the apartment began to shift and blur, revealing the rough wooden panels of the compound's prayer hall. The modern furniture faded like morning mist, replaced by the simple benches and altars Sarah remembered from her childhood. Dr. Martinez stood at the front of the room, no longer wearing her professional attire, but the flowing robes of a high priestess. "The treatment is complete," she announced to the assembled congregation. "Sister Sarah has accepted her sacred purpose." The other survivors from group therapy sat in the front row, their faces blank with religious fervor. They'd all been part of the elaborate psychological manipulation designed to make Sarah believe she'd escaped. Every therapy session, every breakthrough, every moment of supposed healing had been carefully orchestrated to prepare her for this moment. The chanting reached a deafening crescendo as Sarah felt the weight of the life growing inside her, understanding finally that she was carrying not just a child, but the cult's dark legacy into a new generation. Father Gabriel emerged from the shadows, his presence filling the room with an otherworldly energy that made Sarah's skin crawl. He'd aged since she'd last seen him, his once vibrant eyes now hollow and ancient, but his voice retained its hypnotic power. "Welcome home, my child," he said, reaching out to touch her swollen belly. 3 years we've waited. 3 years we've prepared your mind for this moment. The old world rejected our message, but through you, through your child, we'll begin again. Sarah tried to resist, tried to remember the life she thought she'd built outside these walls, but the memories felt insubstantial, like trying to grasp smoke. The chanting of the dead and living blended into a single, overwhelming chorus of devotion. As Father Gabriel's hand pressed against her stomach, she felt the child respond, moving as if eager to meet its spiritual father. The last of her resistance crumbled as she realized the horrifying truth: she'd never wanted to escape at all. Some part of her always been waiting for this moment, this final surrender to the darkness she'd been born to serve. Sarah's story leaves us questioning the very nature of reality itself. Was her escape genuine, or was it all an elaborate psychological manipulation designed to prepare her for the ultimate sacrifice? The line between healing and indoctrination, between memory and implanted suggestion, becomes terrifyingly blurred when we consider how easily our minds can be shaped by those who claim to help us. This twisted tale of psychological horror reminds us that some prisons are invisible, built not of walls and bars, but of carefully constructed beliefs and false memories. If this mind-bending story left you questioning what's real and what's manipulation, hit that like button and share your theories in the comments below. Do you think Sarah ever truly escaped, or was she always meant to return? What would you do if you discovered your entire reality was a carefully orchestrated lie? Subscribe for more psychological thrillers and dark secrets that'll keep you awake at night, questioning everything you thought you knew about the human mind and the power of belief. Until next time, stay kind, stay sharp, and stay curious.